So my name is Nikolas Blanchet. I'm 31 years old. I currently live in San Francisco, California, though I have lived all over the United States, and I have been diagnosed with bipolar II disorder.
And what is bipolar II disorder?
Bipolar II disorder is characterized by long periods of depression-like symptoms. So lethargy, lack of motivation, lack of ambition, periods of hopelessness, periods of sadness, although not everyone experiences it in the same way. In addition to that, bipolar II has a fun little twist where you've also got periods of what's called hypomania. Hypomania is like a less extreme form of mania. Mania being where you have a complete break from reality and you are hyper energetic, hyper optimistic. You usually take a lot of risky behavior. For example, sort of the characteristic that my doctor always tells me to watch out for is, give me a call if you've decided that you're going to Vegas and going to buy a yacht for the weekend, because it might seem like a lot of fun, so bring me in on the fun.
I see. And so then you've experienced these symptoms yourself?
I have hypomania, so what I just described was mania. Hypomania is a less extreme form, and that's one of the reasons why bipolar II disorder is actually mischaracterized and misdiagnosed, which was the case with me. Hypomania, in my case, manifested as periods of extreme sociability, hypersexuality, extreme productivity at work, and less sleep than normal. Also with bipolar II disorder, the hypomanic periods are rare, so 1 to 2 times a year, and fairly brief, somewhere between 3 and 7 days, which is very different than standard mania.
I see. And when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed bipolar II disorder in November of 2012.
Okay, so you've only known then for a little bit of time.
Right.
And how's that affected you? How did that come about?
So I had been diagnosed with depression and this is apparently, by the way, a very typical story. I had been diagnosed with depression for about 5 years. I was going to a psychiatrist and a psychologist regularly, and they would prescribe various antidepressants, none of which would work. And in fact, my symptoms over time gradually but noticeably trended worse and worse and worse. After I moved to the Bay Area, my psychiatrist that I got out here pointed out that I might actually not be responding well to the medication because it was treating something that I didn't have. And instead, he suggested that I switch to mood stabilizers. Well, the confirming fact came after I was taking a very high dosage of an antidepressant, and through the end of November and through most of December, I had a very, very bad period of depression. I had no motivation to do anything. I was very, I'm sorry, I looked at the camera.
No problem.
I had a very, very bad period of depression. I had no motivation to do anything. I stopped going to work. It was pretty bad. And then when I went back in and saw him again, he prescribed what's called a mood stabilizer, which is different than an antidepressant. A mood stabilizer, the most famous of which is lithium. They're actually, the class of drug is anti-epileptic. And they basically cut off the peaks of bipolar II disorder, which is helpful.
Right, so after you started this regimen of drugs, then you didn't experience the depression and the hypomania that you've been experiencing previously? Right.
And another thing I want to point out about bipolar II disorder that makes it so difficult to diagnose is if you think about it, you don't go to your doctor and you don't tell your doctor, by the way, my arm is not broken, right? You don't tell them when you're not having a problem. And when you spend such a long period of your life in a dark place, in a depressed state, which is the way bipolar II works, when you have these brief periods of hypomania, you feel like that's how your life should always be, because it doesn't seem alarming when it's going on, and people aren't alarmed by you because it's not that complete snap from reality. So when I would go to my doctor, I never mentioned these periods. Now I don't have them anymore, but I'm a lot more stable in my day-to-day life.
Nice. Well, that leads me to another question about sort of advantages and disadvantages here. You've touched on them briefly, but from your own perspective, I mean, are there any advantages to being or showing symptoms of bipolar, and I'm also curious from the disadvantages?
So The advantages, I've never really thought of it that way. One thing they don't tell you is that hypomania is awesome. It feels really good. You're an animal in bed. You are hyper productive at work. You have a lot of energy. You are really social. You're really charming. You're really dynamic. You can be a little bit more risky with your behavior, but not so much so that people around you are like scared for you. Mm-hmm. So people just think, wow, Nick's really on par this weekend. You basically feel like you are king of the world for a period of time. And so I guess that's an advantage. Mm-hmm. I guess you could also say there's this philosophical advantage of knowing what pain is, but that's just crazy.
Right.
Which is what I am, so that's okay. The disadvantages are obviously work disruption, right? So that's the biggest one. With me, these long, drawn-out periods of silence. And you know, as a friend of mine, like I would go through periods where no one would hear from Nick. Where's Nick? I would just disappear, because keeping up appearances and making sure the people around me are comfortable and having a good time is important to me. And so when I was in a bad place, instead of like being the negative guy around everyone all the time, I just sort of removed myself from the situation. And of course there's social stigma and stuff attached with it too, which makes it complicated. It makes it difficult to have relationships. It makes it difficult to stick to tasks. I stopped and started college a number of times, and looking back, it probably had a lot to do with this. Mm-hmm. I don't want to blame this for all of my problems, right? I still have good days and bad days. I'm still mortal. I still make mistakes. But I suppose now that I think about it, another advantage of bipolar disorder and having had it diagnosed is I get insight. I know a little bit more about why things happen. Why am I this way? Why? It gives context. It doesn't excuse things. I still have things I need to work on, but it gives a little context about what my struggles might be, about the things that I need to watch out for. It also makes sure that I exercise, because that's very helpful.
In your mind, based on the advantages and disadvantages you shared with us, if you could not be bipolar 2, would you choose that for yourself at this point?
Definitely. This isn't something like being gay or being artistic or something where it might seem like a disadvantage at a period of time in your life, but then contextually it gets better over time, or you're able to socialize it or come to peace with it. Even if you come to peace with being bipolar, which I'd like to think I have, but it's pretty quick. It's still early on. I haven't even been diagnosed for a year yet. Even after coming to peace with it, though, it's not really something that is a good thing. I mean, if I have kids, I'm a carrier for this, potentially, from what I understand. You're the geneticist, so you tell me. But I've got a huge family history of it. It's something that you have to disclose when you date, which is not fun. So yeah, I'd rather not be.
Well, so you touched on 2 points that are really interesting. How do other people perceive you as someone who is bipolar? What's the general reaction? How is it perceived by others, both strangers, just say the general public, but also your friends? How they responded, and what's your reaction to their reactions?
When people who I know and have known for a period of time find out that I'm bipolar, I tend to get one of two reactions. One is generally supportive and saying, oh, well, I'm glad you're getting this managed, I'm glad you've got some stuff, and the other one's sort of like a, duh, I could have told you that. Not because it manifested, but because because they have noticed these trends that I have, and they knew that there was something up, but they never knew what it was. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, this makes sense that you've got this. I have been, let me start that over. I have also sort of taken it upon myself to sort of raise awareness. It's one of the reasons why I was willing to do this interview. So I do actually tell people who I don't know well, and I admit it earlier on. Admit it sounds like the wrong word. And I disclose this earlier on rather than later, because it's not my fault, it's nothing I did, it's just a trait that I've got. I've got blue eyes, I've got a slightly crooked nose, I've got a red beard and red hair. I'm also bipolar. And so it's just something that I've inherited. And most people that I've noticed when I tell them, they sort of, the number one reaction I get is they name someone else that they know and are close to that is bipolar 1 or 2. And they immediately look for some sort of connection. And so my reaction to that, when people look to try and humanize it and make a connection with me, is I don't know, I want to go into detail. It makes me feel like I'm not doing this on my own, if that makes sense.
Sure. Are there any negative reactions? Do people ever, I mean, I heard you make a joke earlier about, oh, I'm crazy. Are there any misperceptions out there that you found about bipolar? And what are those misperceptions?
There's bipolar 2 specifically, I've noticed, also sort of has other people who have bipolar 2 disorder, a lot of times they've been living with depression or bipolar 2 for a very long time undiagnosed, and they've set a lot of habits in place, and they've come to a lot of, I feel like, not good self-image. And a lot of people that I've met who are bipolar 2 actually want to blame everything on the illness. Like they'll say, I told my boss the other day, well, I'm bipolar, so I shouldn't have to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes this tug of war between integration with society, becoming a productive member, and actually doing what you need to do to handle your disability.
You mentioned previously too that you said you had a family history of this. Now, from a genetics perspective, elucidating the genetic component of bipolar disorder, along with many other mental sort of health conditions, anything from schizophrenia to autism, it's been very difficult to identify a single genetic cause, even several genetic causes. Most of the findings have indicated smaller contributions of individual genes here and there, and the search continues with genome-wide association studies. Now people are trying to move into whole genome sequencing of people who have been diagnosed. We're curious in knowing, what is your family history of bipolar and any other mental health condition that you think might be related?
My family on my mom's side, we're crazy. Like, it's just for real. So my mom was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, and she was actually on the same medication that I am on now for a while, but she never told me this. Growing up with a sort, and you can read up on this more if you're interested, but growing up with sort of like a mentally ill parent causes a lot of, like, you to react to things slightly differently. Like, I keep my mom at an arm's distance, and she sort of felt embarrassed by stuff, and so there wasn't a lot of disclosure about the health situations and the traits that we've got. So I'm only recently finding out a lot of the stuff that my mom's got. She's also been diagnosed, well, I'm going to caveat this by saying that this is all reported by my mother. So I actually, obviously, I'm not privy to her medical records. But according to my mother, there are also depression and ADD and sometimes, depending on the doctor she sees, a personality disorder like borderline or something. Mm-hmm. My sister, one of my younger sisters, suffers from depression. My dad is actually on that side of the family, he is the most ADD person I have ever met in my entire life. Like, the Wikipedia hole where you just clicking on hyperlink after hyperlink after hyperlink until you've got a million tabs open. Yeah, like, he can't use Wikipedia because it's paralyzing. His weekend will be gone.
So it sounds like you have, immediate and extended family that have also demonstrated similar symptoms of depression, possibly even mania, like you say in your mom, hypomania.
Right.
And how does that make you feel about a connection with other people, genetically speaking and otherwise? Do you feel a kinship with other people who've been diagnosed with bipolar, or do you think of these people as they're just other people and it happens to be a trait as well, or is this part of a broader thread that you think ties you to other people? Well,
I definitely think there's shared experience. But the social stigma against a lot of mental illness, is particularly bipolar 2 disorder, because it just looks like laziness a lot of the time. The social stigma there actually even affects the people who have it, right? So I find myself, when I'm not, thinking this through, behaving logically, I find myself not wanting to associate with other bipolar people, wanting to hold them at arm's distance, not wanting to find some sort of community. Because what do we have in common? What, we're all crazy? Why should we celebrate that? This is a problem. And yet, that shared experience is helpful. Sometimes you can get insights from very interesting and different places that you would never think about. So, and about areas of your life and managing areas of your life, like the exercise thing. Exercise has been a huge impact on my life. And that, I mean, my doctor mentioned it, but it didn't really sink in until I saw the high-functioning people who were bipolar 2 all exercised. And then again, maybe I thought they were high-functioning because they exercised. And I was like, that's what it is for me. I don't know.
So when you bring that up, just to sort of give all of our students a generally well-rounded perspective here, are you telling us that bipolar 2 is manageable?
Very manageable. Bipolar 2 is, unlike some other mental illnesses, bipolar 2 it's incredibly manageable with medication alone, actually. It responds extremely well. Some of the more modern psychological treatments, like cognitive behavioral therapy, they have had some success as well, but not nearly as much as they've had in other areas. This is very easily fixed and managed with just taking a pill every day.
Do you know of any specific genetic risk that you have for bipolar? Has your doctor told you about a specific genetic risk you might have, or have you discovered any particular gene or genetic risk you might have for bipolar?
I've been told that it is heritable, that it was likely in my family, but that doesn't necessarily mean genetic. So I wasn't told specifically about genetics.
What do you think about the portrayal of mental health in general, both in the media and in society at large, how we deal with it as a population? Do you think we take mental health seriously? Do you think it's portrayed in a meaningful way that gets the right kind of attention? Or do you think we still have some work to do?
I definitely believe that in the area of portrayal of mental health, in the area of how the average person thinks of mental health, we have some work to do, because it's easy to look at someone and say, you have a broken leg, you have a scratch, you've been burned, but when it permeates the mind, when it permeates the thing that's sitting behind the eyes and looking back at you, it's hard to say, well, you're an asshole versus you have an issue. And because it's so difficult to recognize in the first place, we tend to overlook it, minimize it, and not give it the type of treatment that we should. I went through a period, actually, where insurance was not quite clear for me, and so I ended up going to a public clinic to try and get some assistance with this not long after my diagnosis. And I'm glad the public clinic existed. It was nice that the city of San Francisco, who funded it, has decided to make this type of program available. But it was dehumanizing. There are 6 slots available on a Saturday, and the doors open at 9, and you're allowed to start lining up at 7 a.m. If you're the 7th person in line, you will not be seen. And so I got up at 6 a.m. and I made my way down to Soma, which is quasi-sketchy area of San Francisco, and I waited in line with other people who were potentially violently mentally ill, and I knew nothing about it. And for the first hour and a half, it was completely unsupervised. There was no one there was no guard, there was no nothing. It was just a bunch of people who were there. Several people who had had a chronic mental illness came up and had gotten into line, and then when the security guard finally came, she recognized a lot of these individuals as people who apparently came very frequently, and told them that we already had the correct number of people in line. So basically turning them away, even though they were in the correct order in line. And that whole period, it made me recognize that a lot of these people who were in line, I mean, a lot of them had been addicted. They now were missing their teeth. They were now possibly weren't even very educated to begin with. And these are people who, certain areas in America, they consider people like that to just be leeches on society, to be people who should be not assisted because they should just fix their own lives. And I look at them and I see how lucky I am to be privileged in many ways, to actually have been educated, to have a better than average mind. That sounds really conceited. To have sort of some of these self-perceptions and tools, and that I'm able to get help. And I wonder, when I see them, if they were able to get help earlier, how different would their lives be? would their lives actually have been very productive? Would they been able to get back like I've been able to do? So yeah, I think that there are major challenges.
If you could say one thing or one message, generally speaking, to other people who have bipolar 1 or 2, or people who may wonder if they do, maybe haven't been diagnosed but have been going through issues themselves, if you could give them a message or tell them something, is there anything in particular you would want to say?
If I had to have a message for somebody who's bipolar 2, I would definitely say seek medical assistance. This is something that responds very well to treatment, and once you've gotten the proper treatment, once you've been able to help yourself out, then you can live a very, very satisfying and happy life. If you can't afford medical treatment, exercise. It actually goes a long way.